Criminal justice system, or the justice system in general. Most Americans who call the Bob Grant Show believe it is not doing justice to the American public. Most people feel that the criminal is getting all the breaks, and society at large is given very little concern. We have with us a trial judge who has authored a book which is titled Doing Justice. He is Judge Robert Satter. Before he was appointed to the bench 15 years ago, Judge Robert Satter was a prominent lawyer and Connecticut state representative, and he lives in Glastonbury, Connecticut. This is your first book, Your Honor. Why did you write it?
Talk about doing justice.
Yes. You want to share what you feel you've learned sitting on the bench?
I learned that doing justice is a difficult job, but one worth doing.
What makes it difficult?
The two different levels of judicial decision making. On the one level, the intellectual one, discovering what the law is. And on the other level, in many cases involving people deciding what's the right thing to do. And that's what makes it difficult.
According to William Styron, who is certainly a well-known person and one I'm sure you're proud to have write words about your book, he says central to Judge Satter's narrative is his own conscience. And it is the role played by his conscience that gives this book its moral tension and moral authority. Why would we have to be concerned about a judge's conscience if all the judge is dealing with is the rules of evidence? If you are hearing a case and the evidence shows that the person is guilty, or the jury comes in with a guilty verdict, why should that influence your conscience?
Because that isn't the only cases the judge decides. I agree with you. With respect to a jury case, the judge's conscience plays very little part. Plays some part. He has to determine what the law is and instruct the jury on what the law is, and that's a matter of judgment. But a judge decides many other cases. He decides cases involving child custody, for example. In criminal cases, he decides the sentence. In juvenile cases, he decides whether or not a woman should continue to be the mother of her child. In housing cases, he decides whether or not tenants should be evicted. And all of those are judgments that he has to make, and judgments are made on the basis of the law, to the extent that the law controls. But in many of them, they're made on the basis of a judge's conscience, a judge's values, a judge's point of view, a judge's vision of human nature, and a judge's conscience.
Judge Satter, do you ever say to yourself, why, what am I doing sitting on the bench? It's taking too much of an emotional toll on me.
I say to myself sometimes, who am I to have the right to judge this case? But I don't say it's taking too much of a toll on me.
You say, who am I to judge these cases? That is a rather humble question that you are asking, but yet it would suggest to me that it makes you, by virtue of having asked such a question, a fair judge.
No, I don't. I think there are certain circumstances where any human being has got to ask himself, who am I to judge? I think sentencing a young person, for example, who has committed a crime to jail, to prison, is a hard decision. I think deciding who among two parents should have custody of the children sometimes is a very hard decision. I think the hardest decision of all is determining whether or not a mother or a parent has so abused the child that they should no longer be the parent of that child. Those are decisions that come close to exercising the power of a God over people. anybody who is not humbled by the responsibility of making those decisions should be.
When you do render an opinion, when you make a decision, do you leave it in the courtroom where you made it, or do you take it home? Do you agonize over it? Do you lose sleep over it? Do you second-guess yourself?
Well, those are two questions. Do I agonize over a decision before I make it? Very often, yes. Do I take it home? Very often, yes. Do I sleep on it? Very often, yes. When I have decided, do I second-guess myself? Almost never. Almost never. There was one case I did, but almost never.
Want to tell us about that case?
Well, I had a case where a man was accused of robbing an older woman, binding her in the chair and stealing her money. And the woman had not identified this man in a series of police photos of him. Had not identified him in a police identification process, but identified him in the courtroom. And that's the worst place for anybody to identify an assailant, because obviously the defendant sitting next to his counsel is most likely to be is the easiest person to identify. At any rate, the evidence as given by her was substantial if her identification was right. He put on witnesses that indicated he was not present at the scene of the crime, but actually had been at a family party. And he had a number of his relatives and even some of his friends who testified that he was not. At that given time and place, he was at this family party. But the jury found him guilty. And the evidence, the responsibility of the jury was, the jury had a justification for finding him guilty because they had a right to believe the woman. But I felt that her identification was very weak. And I really believed the people who had said he was someplace else. But the jury had found him guilty. Then I had to look at his record, because at this point I had to sentence him. And his record was terrible. He had had several other robberies and even another crime that had not been dissimilar from the one which he had just been convicted of. But I had, based on the evidence that I had heard, some substantial doubt about whether he had committed the crime. But I sentenced him. And I sentenced him pretty severely, because based on his record, he deserved it. But I had doubts about whether, in fact, he was guilty. And that's the only decision that I know of that I've ever second-guessed myself or wondered about whether I was right.
Subsequent to that decision, did any information come out to either confirm that you had done the right thing in sentencing him, or had new evidence disclosed anything which would make you think that maybe there should be a review of his case?
Well, it wasn't possible to review it. The jury had decided, and there was no legal basis for review. But I heard from in the courtroom gossip that the chap who I had sentenced, the fellow who was found guilty, was notorious in this small town up in the northern part of Connecticut, and that the neighbors had thought he was guilty, and the people in the town thought he was guilty. But that's certainly not very good evidence of anything. And of course, I didn't hear that during the course of the trial. So in a way, the subsequent opinion people had of him justified the verdict.
We're going to go public with Judge Robert Satter, who takes his work very seriously, who has authored Doing Justice, a trial judge at work, published by American Lawyer Books, which is a subsidiary of Simon & Schuster. If you'd like to talk to the judge, the way you do it is from New Jersey, 489 WABC. If you're from his state, Connecticut, 563 WABC. And New York, 563 WABC. We'll get to those telephone calls and back to the judge in just a moment. All right, on WABC, I see quite a few people are calling Judge Satter, so let's get to our telephones and see what's on Frank's mind. Yes, hello, Frank.
Good evening, Bob. Good evening, Judge. Your Honor, I'm an attorney, but I'm not involved in criminal law. I was just curious as to what extent you feel the lack of available prison space is in when a judge determines what sentence to impose, and what will it be in the future as jail space continues to get more and more scarce?
That's a good question. the availability of jail space is a critical question in our criminal justice system. In Connecticut, every person who is put into jail each day or prison each day, another one has to be let out. The result is that people are actually spending 1/10 of the judge's sentence in the prison, and there being other kinds of control is exercised over them, including halfway houses and so forth. But the lack of prison space does affect sentencing. For some judges, it means they give a larger sentence because they know that a percentage of it is only going to be served. For other judges, they frankly don't know what to do because the prison system is the lack of jail space or prison space is so great that the whole system is breaking down.
But don't you feel the amount of crimes and the people committing crimes will actually continue to increase and worsen because there's much less deterrence at this point?
I think that's true. I think that the criminal justice system, I can only speak for Connecticut, is failing simply because there is not enough correction space. And I think that people who are wise to what's happening in our court system do realize that there's a lack of deterrence and a lack of punishment, and that people feel they can commit crimes.
Well, do you foresee another type of deterrence? And if you do, how would you describe that?
Well, there are these things people put on so that they're being monitored as to where they are, and that's a form of constraint, keeping people in their homes. But the real problem for crime, of course, is the drugs. Until we solve the drug problem, we're not going to solve the crime problem in the United States. In Connecticut, 80% of all crimes are related to drugs.
What does that mean exactly, Judge Satter?
That means that 80% of the crimes that are committed are crimes that are committed because people want drugs, steal because of drugs, or involved in the drug traffic, or in some way are doing something antisocial because of their drug addiction.
All right, Frank, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
80%, that's a tremendous percentage. Walter, hello.
May I talk to the judge, Bob?
Of course.
Judge, I'm a retired administrative judge. I served in New York for 13 years. The best advice I ever heard concerning the function of a judge was from a layman whom I had great respect for. Just before I was sworn, he told me, it is not the function of a judge merely to preside, to see that there's an orderly trial, not merely to see that the rules of evidence are observed, or to instruct the jury. The function of a judge is to, during the course of a trial, if he sees there is certain evidence important which should be brought out or testimony brought out, he should intervene and see that it's brought out. And in other words, it was his contention, you cannot fairly evaluate a case unless you have all of the facts. And if all of the facts are being overlooked or not revealed, it is your function to see that all the facts are presented, and then you can properly evaluate the case and present the proper instructions to the jury.
You want some response from the judge?
Yes, I'd like to find out whether the judge has observed that or whether he agrees with my opinion as to the function of a judge.
Well, only partly so. I believe that where facts can be elicited by asking questions of the witnesses, that a judge, if he finds or feels that the lawyer is not going to do it, should intervene and should ask the questions. But he has to do so in such a way as to not destroy the adversary system. But on the other hand, the implication of what your friend said is that the judge can somehow produce evidence, but the judge can't call witnesses. He can't even order that the lawyers call witnesses. He's very much of a passive participant in the trial. He can ask questions when he thinks he can justifiably do so to elicit evidence, but again, only in order to be fair to both sides. And sometimes it happens that a case is decided on the failure of evidence having been produced, but it's really not the responsibility of the judge.
All right, Walter, I thank you for the call. Joe Nolan standing by at the Metro Traffic Control Center, and Joe, you're on. This is Bob Grant. You're on WABC with Judge Satter. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to speak to His Honor. Your Honor, if a person confessed to a crime, isn't it the duty of the judicial system to prove that person is telling the truth? whether they're, don't they have to present certain facts before that person's indicted, even though they confess to it?
Yes.
Okay. In the case of the Central Park jogger, there was the DEA test showed there was no semen, no pubic hairs. All the blood this lady lost, supposed to have lost, not one drop was on these children's clothes. Now,
Children?
well, I'm 45. They're children to me.
Yeah, of course. And if they raped your wife, they'd still be children to you.
Well.
Okay. Where are you trying to lead the
I'm trying to
judge?
see
You're obviously
where
trying to
the
lead the
came
judge
from.
to give you an answer to fulfill a prejudice that you have.
No, it's no prejudice.
No?
It has nothing to do. It has something to do with where this indictment comes from.
But wasn't there other evidence? Wasn't there the admission of some of the people who were involved? Wouldn't that put them at the scene and make them culpable?
You know better than I do that admissions have been.
Here we go. He's trying to lead the judge into. Don't give him any. You know better than I do.
These confessions were under duress.
Well, that's what we have judges for.
Okay.
We have judges to determine whether or not the confessions are under duress. And I'm certain
now, the
that
children say one thing and the police say another. Okay, now this is what we're going to try. Now, I still can't see where this indictment came from, and without there's no scientific evidence.
Well, but we don't only convict on the basis of science. We don't even indict only on the basis of scientific evidence.
Mm-hmm.
We indict first on the probability that a crime has been committed. Not that it has been committed, but the probability that it has been committed.
Mm-hmm.
And then we convict on the basis of all the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if confessions were taken from young people without due process, and
which was done.
Well, that's for a judge to decide. A motion is made to quash the confessions, and all the evidence respecting how the confession was obtained is presented to a judge, and based upon our principles of law, he decides. If he decides that the confession was involuntarily obtained, then he would quash that confession, no matter how much that confession reveals the involvement of that person, because the confession being involuntary, its use would be a violation of due process of law. If he finds that the confessions were not improperly obtained, then the confessions would be allowed, and the jury would hear them. But that's what we have judges for. That's our system.
And Chuck, you're on WABC. Hello.
Intercourse.
On WABC. I got it, Roy. I got it, Roy. Herbert, you're on WABC. Hello.
Oh, hello, sir. I'd like to speak to the judge and share something with him and get his opinion on a case that I was a juror on. I'll try to make it very brief. It was a young black man, and when I first got on the jury, I thought, well, how nice, I hope he's guilty. I convict this kind of person who always goes around with radios and harasses me. But as the trial progressed, I noticed that all the witnesses, which were prosecution witnesses, not one of them said that anything was stolen. And yet the charge was robbery. And the judge instructed us that unless all the points, including that money had been stolen, were proven, the verdict had to be not guilty. But all 11 others, the jurors, they all seemed determined to get this boy off the streets, as one or two of them said. And what happened was we asked the judge about 7 questions or so, and every one of them, it was a dispute between myself and the others. The judge, or the question on the record, supported my position. The main thing the main items that made the other jurors say that something was stolen, especially the leader of the group, was that $8 had been seen on the floor, on the ground, and that one of the cops had picked it up. And the other thing was the desk officer's statement on the. Well, that was in evidence. The desk officer's statement was in evidence that $8 had been stolen. However, the judge had instructed us that the statement on the paper was not admissible. However, I forgot that, and I had a case of my own, a parking violation case.
Would you like to get a response from the judge?
Sorry. Okay.
Or should we continue with this?
Let me just make one point. What happened was, at the end, it turned out, after I went along with the others, that that the grand jury evidence had been that nothing had been stolen. And
do you have a question for the judge?
Okay, well, the lawyer approached me. Somebody.
No, I guess he doesn't have a question.
Oh, I do have a question. Somebody.
Well, would you please ask?
Okay, the question was, was this a miscarriage of justice? And
you're the one that has to answer that, sir. You were the one who decided the case. If you decided that, if you in your heart felt that evidence, as you were told the law by the judge, did not warrant his being convicted, then you should not have convicted him. And your prevention, if you had voted not to convict him, he would not have been convicted. The power was completely within your hands. And so when we talk about a miscarriage of justice, you've got to look at your own conscience about that.
Okay. Now he has nothing to say. Herbert, you're at WABC. Hello. Do we have Herbert here? All right, let's go to John. John, you're on WABC. Hello.
Yeah, good evening, Bob. I'd like to speak to your guest. Your Honor, my name is John. I'm a 45-year-old middle-aged male who is a ex-cocaine user. I've been in recovery for a year and a half now. What I wanted to discuss was legalizing drugs, which I don't agree with. However, when I look at myself and what I've done in my addiction, yes, I violated the law in using an illegal drug and hurt myself more than I did anybody else. But putting me in jail wouldn't have solved the problem. The problem can only be solved through rehabs and education. And
what do you mean when you say education? What is that?
Well,
you mean somebody had to tell you, John, drugs are debilitating? I don't understand what you guys mean when you say education.
Well, Bob, what I mean by that is, today they don't teach religion in school.
No. What does it mean for you
me?
That you needed rehab and education?
Well, I needed education to find out that I have a higher power. I have somebody.
Well, isn't that part of the rehab?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So you're just being redundant then?
Yes, forgive me. I'm being redundant. I'm a little nervous.
Yeah. Well, what do you have a specific question for Judge Satter?
I wanted to know his position on, whether, not that I want to legalize it, but putting people in jail for the crime of using drugs, if he thought that was an answer.
It's a hard question. I don't think it is the answer, but I don't know what else we can do with them. I don't think it's the answer at all. And I'm not sure that I would like putting people in jail because of drugs, or the use of them, although I have on occasion been forced to do so in the sense that there was no other alternative. But I don't think it's the answer. I think that the drug problem, as I indicated earlier in this program, is an enormous one, having its greatest impact upon our criminal justice system. I think that the desire to reduce that pressure on our criminal justice system leads to the notion of legalization of drugs, but the other side of that is it makes drugs more available and it leads to more addiction and to more problems. So
no, I don't agree with the legalization of it, but I don't agree with just arbitrarily putting people in jail.
You weren't put in jail arbitrarily.
Excuse me?
These people aren't being put in jail arbitrarily.
No, not arbitrarily, but they are being put in jail because they have a disease.
A disease?
Yes.
I see. This guy's trying to palm off Alcoholics Anonymous on us.
No, I don't think so. I think he's raising a serious question. I mean, we don't know what to do with just the user. We're not talking about the dealer, not talking about the seller.
You say they're suffering from a disease, Judge Satter?
I would say that addiction is a disease. It's obviously it was self-imposed to start with, but I think addiction is a disease. Yes.
Well, then we shouldn't have the judicial system involved at all. It should be the medical system entirely. You guys should be out of it then. If addiction is a disease, then where do you guys come in? What do we need with judges for?
Well, we need judges to deal with the crimes that flow from it.
Oh, the crimes. But what about the user? I take it this fellow on the line, John, was just a user. Right, John?
Correct.
Okay. What do we do with him?
I think we do what happened to him. We try to get him into rehabilitation. And apparently it's working with him, for which he is to be praised.
Okay, John.
Okay, thank you.
It's 16 minutes before 7 o'clock. Robert Satter, go ahead.
Bob, thanks. Yeah. Listening to Your Honor, I becoming more aware of what may be one of the biggest problems in our judicial system. I have several questions. The first one is, I'm asking the first one, which is, how often does his personal feelings enter into his job? Because throughout the interview, I've heard several personal feelings that the judge has had, and maybe this is because this is what's on his mind now, or maybe because during his sitting on a trial, he actually finds that he has his own personal moral feelings coming through onto his job duties. And the reason I'm asking that question, and the other question is, I'd like the judge to speak generally on why it's important for the judge, if he feels this is true, to make interpretive decisions on anything other than really interpreting the law as it's written on the books. Specifically, those things may be evidence, procedure, sentencing. Prior callers have come up with these same concern. And doesn't the judge agree that he shouldn't have an opinion as to guilt, but merely those things I've just said, evidence, procedure, sentencing?
Okay, Your Honor,
wouldn't it be less painful for the judge himself?
Boy, Maron, these guys, I could just imagine any one of these guys, if you said, does the defendant have anything to say before we pass sentence, you'd never get a chance to pass sentence. These are the most long-winded people I've ever heard.
Well,
do you have a response for this gentleman, Your Honor?
Yes, I do. I think what he's concerned about is, does a judge's personal feelings play a part in his judgment? With respect to issues that involve the law only, judge's personal feelings do not play a part in his judgment. With respect to a whole broad range of cases where a judge has discretion, his values, his view of human nature, his conscience even play a part in his judgment. They play a part, for example, in choosing who should have custody of children. They play a part in his sentencing. His view of human nature is reflected in his sentencing. They play a part in determining whether or not a mother is able to continue to be the parent of a child. And they play a part in many other so-called equity decisions that he makes. So a judge, on the one hand, is forced to apply the law where it is clear, and he does so. Where the law gives him a broad discretion, he uses his best judgment, which includes making a judgment that involves his personal values.
All right, on WABC, we say hello now to Gladys. Hello, Gladys.
Hello, Mr. Grant. How are you?
What's on your mind, Gladys?
Yes, I would like to speak to Judge Satter. I am a ex-court clerk of his in the Hartford Superior Court, and I have read his book, and I was just curious about the beginning of the book regarding a certain paragraph that has me thinking, and it's regarding the political appointment of judges. I guess at the time that he was appointed in Hartford, it was the Democratic machinery, the Democratic Party, that was very big here. And he was appointed apparently by I forget who it was, but it was by a gentleman who was a Democrat and had a very big Democratic following, and nominated Judge Satter possibly to the bench as a judge because of his political affiliations. And I would just like to know if he was just being honest and forthright and saying, this is how the system is. If you're of a certain political persuasion, you might have an in a little more than somebody else who maybe was a Republican or a conservative.
Good question.
Thank you.
I was appointed entirely because I was a political person in the political machinery in Connecticut. I was not appointed because I was a Phi Beta Kappa, or because I went to Columbia Law School, or for any other reason.
Well, I'm sure that's probably, that must have had.
Isn't it refreshing to hear such honesty, Gladys?
Excuse me? I think it's wonderful.
Okay, thank you, Gladys.
Thank you.
But let me just finish, because the point I really want to make is that politics is a good grounds for appointing people to judgeship. I really believe the experience in politics makes a better judge. It gives a better understanding of people, and it allows for a recognition that sometimes things are not black and white, and it gives a certain awareness of the empathy, or a certain awareness of what people really feel. And a lot of the judge's decision making is responding to people, and I think politics is an excellent ground for that. At the present time, in many states now, there are so-called There are boards that determine whether judges are qualified, and they're for the better, I think. But in the end, I would think that our system of appointing judges on the basis of their political involvement is still a good one.
All right. On WABC with Judge Satter. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Bob. Your Honor, I'd like to ask you a two-part question. One, how can we let these mutts go on technicalities such as the Miranda or the no-knock law? And two, aren't the lawyers and even the judges embarrassed by some of the travesties of justice when it's absolutely clear that these people are guilty and they're getting off on a technicality? I'll hang up so I can hear your answer.
Your technicality is my due process. Extracting a confession from somebody who did not voluntarily give it and then convicting him on that basis is, to me, a greater travesty than letting a guilty person go free. And the Supreme Court thinks so still, and that's the nature of our due process.
Even though we have cases all over the country of people who have been turned loose into society only to kill again and again and again.
We have that. I can't say that doesn't happen, but I can also say that it's important to keep a quality of justice in our system, and one of the ways we do it is we never convict a man who has not made a voluntary confession. Or put it another way, we don't convict a man on the basis of an involuntary confession. And I think that's the kind of society we don't want, even though it leads to the kind of things you just said.
It's Blaze checking in on the line right now with Judge Satter. Go ahead, Blaze.
Hi, Your Honor. Thank you for that last comment, because I was just reading about the Guilford 4 in Sunday's Times, and that illustrates your point. I have two questions. Going over, contemplating the inherent imperfections in the system and also perhaps negligence that it occasionally intervenes, in your gut feeling, what percentage of guilty verdicts would you say are actually wrongful convictions? Just your gut feeling.
Less than 1%.
And in reference to the Brady versus Maryland rule, would you think it proper for codification of it, and have you ever encountered having to retrial a case because the DA did not follow the Brady rule?
Well, why don't you tell the listeners what the Brady rule is?
Tell the audience what the Brady rule. Tell the audience what the Brady rule is, Your Honor, please.
Go ahead. You tell us.
He hung up.
I'm sorry. I must confess to you, I don't know what the Brady rule is.
Okay, good for you. You know, it's so refreshing to have somebody so honest. And I think that gentleman on the line was just trying to impress you. Nancy, you're at WABC. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. I wanted to ask the judge, when people are living in the United States with a green card and they commit a crime, I just feel we could save a lot of money, court costs, jail, and prison, if instead we buy them a one-way ticket and send them back to their country with the stipulation that they can never again live here or get a green card. I just don't think it's fair for us to spend all this money. How do you
feel about that? That's what she was going to ask you. Do you have any comment on what she just said?
Well, I think that we should use the criminal system to punish people for criminal crimes, and we should not use our immigration system for criminal purposes.
If you had to do it all over again 15 years ago, would you have accepted the appointment of the bench?
I sure would have.
You have no regrets?
None at all. I love being a judge.
Judge Robert Satter, I appreciate you coming in. I find your candor absolutely refreshing, and I thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that slams the lid on things for today. Until tomorrow, this is Bob Grant reminding you the judge is happy it's over. Your influence counts. Use it. Give this man 15 days in the studio. It's 7 o'clock.
From ABC News, I'm Doug Limerick. President Bush has congratulated the newly elected president of Nicaragua. ABC's Ann Compton says he called Violeta Chamorro.
The white?
What is this organization called the Hyacinth Foundation? What is that?
It's a non-profit organization in New Brunswick, New Jersey, that is basically catering to the homosexual needs. They have run a walkathon recently and raised $52,000 in New Jersey this past summer. And I'm not 100% sure what they're doing with all the money.
I can't believe the...
As I say, they receive from the state treasury of New Jersey, where you and I live, Yeah. $808,000 in the last 3 years, which is a lot.
You know, it's really so tawdry. It's so demeaning, so dehumanizing. You read the safer sex do's and don'ts, which, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to read over the air, because even though it would be all right if I did, from a legal standpoint, I just don't have the stomach for it. But the way they have the directions for so-called safe sex, as though they're giving you directions on how to put together some intricate erector set or something. It's sickening, absolutely sickening. And I don't know. When I say it's sickening, I mean just that. It's sickening. And they use words. They use 4-letter words.
Oh, freely, yes.
Yeah, freely.
In fact, Hyacinth has been in Hunterdon County High School in approximately April of 1989, giving a presentation to the high school students, and they've tried to get into other high schools. So they're trying to educate our youth with what you see in front of you. And I personally object to that, and I object to the fact that our state treasury is funding this.
Pam, you're on WABC with Mr. Mansfield. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Mansfield is speaking about inappropriate actions by the New Jersey State Department of Health. I'd like him to comment on something. I've been following legislation that's been recently passed by an overwhelming majority, and among other things, it states that HIV-positive tests should be reportable to the Department of Health. And this would enable the health department to interrupt the spread of AIDS, because obviously people with HIV positives will become AIDS patients. And it would also help the health department give assistance to the people infected with the virus. Recently, I think ACT UP has been lobbying to have the bill amended and that the test results wouldn't be reported. That would seem to make it impossible for the health department to do its job. Since public health is for all citizens, what do you think about high visibility special interest groups whose only concern is themselves? And especially groups like ACT UP, where officials appear to crumble when they're under pressure from groups like ACT UP.
Well, that's a very true question. They had about 20 to 25 people demonstrating in front of the State House this past week, and they did influence Governor Florio. He did refer them to Brenda Bacon, who has her own problems, as I've seen in the past, questionable credibility. Yes, they do crumble, and it's very serious. Notification is absolutely important. The homosexuals are the only group that I'm aware of that don't want their partners to be notified.
That seems to be the biggest problem, that there are other people involved. They're a small minority compared to the rest of the population.
Right. The former commissioner, Molly Coy, has bluntly stated in public testimony in April of last year that the IV drug abusers are the most numerous group in the state of New Jersey, but also has the least attention given to it by the Department of Health. Mm-hmm. It's a living contradiction. So you're right. Whoever yells the most gets literally the attention of the politicians.
That's what I was afraid of.
And if they cut out the notification, they will cut out the heart of the bill, and the gutless politicians that go that way should be ousted as soon as humanly possible.
Well, I agree totally. And keep up the pressure.
I intend to.
Okay, thank you.
Nancy, you're on WABC. Hello.
Hi. Mr. Mansfield. Hello?
Yes.
Okay, this is my question. You said before, I think, that people were getting like $3.7 million for, I don't know, notification and something else. Just how much of that is really going for notification? The problem is, you know, AIDS is basically considered a communicable disease. With syphilis and gonorrhea and TB, these rates went down a lot, and almost before AIDS started pushing them back up again, we're almost, you know, not completely eradicated, but really doing well before being eradicated. Now with AIDS, they're back up again. Why isn't the government the state government putting more money into notification when they know it works? At least then, if you have someone on a list that you know is infected with HIV, should a prophylaxis become available, these people can be given something. Why do they allow groups like ACT UP and stuff to counteract all kinds of public health principles that they know work with such a disease that is so deadly? Why do they let it happen? And are they getting enough funds?
Well, there's more than enough money there. It's just the way it's being used. And they can use it freely because, believe it or not, Centers for Disease Control, by law, by the way the Congress passed the law, does not require any accounting or accountability for 1 penny that it gives to every state. It's the good faith that they use it the way they're supposed to.
Well, how do the people in New Jersey get away with not using enough for notification and contact tracing when that definitely works?
Well,
it works.
Well, on public television, Robert Hummel, who is the Assistant Commissioner for the AIDS Division, has stated that he is homosexual and out of the closet 10 years and proud of it. Now, he is formulating policy. In fact, he was the number 2 man in the New York AIDS Division that was audited by their state controller. And what I can see is, I have their report, which is quite extensive, and New York's audit of their own agency and what's happening in New Jersey is unbelievably similar. In fact, I've been working and dealing with the Health and Human Service, which is a federal agency, the Office of Inspector General. They do have an open investigation as requested by me and my Congressman Chris Smith separately. And it is still going on. I have spoke to the local man on the scene in Trenton numerous times, and he sees some very serious problems.
Do they think they're going to do anything about it? Can CDC step in and say, you're not going to have any more money unless you do this, unless you do more for contact tracing and forget about these small interest groups?
Oh, absolutely. But the fact is, when you think that Mr. Hummel, who is running the organization, is running it for his benefit and apparently his friends' benefit, not for public health, the probability of change will have to be forced on him. Not going to do it voluntarily.
Can it be forced on him?
Oh, absolutely.
By how? Just declining amount of dollars in CDC?
Yes, and also an absolute audit. One of the recommendations that this field supervisor in Trenton is going to make to his superiors in Washington is that New Jersey be audited from 1986 through current times.
Is there a chance that might happen?
The chance, in my opinion, is only if political pressure is brought to bear on the bureaucracy. I have spoken to John Tanur in New York City back in November of '88 for the first time, and since then also, and he doesn't consider this a priority. He doesn't feel New Jersey is that much involved with a money problem that he wants to take the time and resources. I have written to Bill Bradley, and he was going to make an inquiry of the Health and Human Services in Washington. But all the various people that are listening to this, if they write their own congressman and Senator Bradley and push the political pressure to the bureaucracy, then we'll have no choice. The fact that we're talking about probably billions of dollars nationwide, this is not a New Jersey problem only. There are implications that this exists throughout the entire country. So we're looking at a national scandal, not a New Jersey scandal.
Absolutely, and scandal is the right word.
Thank you.
Thank you. Betty, you're on WABC with Mr. Mansfield. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'd like to know, first of all, if the New Jersey Department of Health has any CDC grant money left at the end of the year. And if so, can they just keep it and do what they want with this money? I think this is something that's very important for us taxpayers to know.
Yes, they obviously do have money left over. I found out September of '88 when Robert Hummel came in that approximately $1 million was left laying around they didn't know what to do with, and they were afraid it would be caught. So he made an announcement, and it came out, I read it in the Newark Star Ledger, that $600,000 would be allocated to a hospice for youth who are teenagers in Newark. And also, separately, they announced that 19 community-based organizations would be given an additional $10,000 each.
So where did it go?
That's a good question, because the hospice was never set up, the money was never spent, and Molly Coy in April of last year confirmed at a public hearing that that $10,000 was never given to those 19 organizations. So we're now talking about $790,000 out of the million that was never spent, but publicly it appeared to have been spent. And it's a damn good question as to where did it go, and that's what I want the federal auditors to find out, that and a lot of other money.
But you said before that this one auditor doesn't think that it's enough of a priority to investigate. Was that what you were referring to?
Not the man on the scene in Trenton. It's his boss in New York City that feels it's not a priority. He has all of New Jersey, all of New York, and Puerto Rico to contend with, and he feels Medicare fraud is much more important than state fraud.
But do any of the congressmen know anything about this?
Yes, Chris Smith's been deeply involved for about almost 2 years now, and Bill Bradley I've had involved for about 6 months.
Have they answered you to your satisfaction at all?
They're waiting for the results of the investigation. I've asked Bill Bradley and Smith recently to make sure that the audit is performed, that the resources and manpower and money are allocated. Otherwise, it's going to be another whitewash, which has happened with the state auditors. I'm leaving with Mr. Grant a copy of the state audit report, which was absolutely a blatant whitewash. I've had 3 of the Federal Office of Inspector General people read it in 2 different places, and they've all laughed at it and said that they couldn't believe what they're reading. The state criminal investigator was heard to have said this is a blatant whitewash. His report, the state investigator's report, was rewritten for him and came out to be a very bland nothing. It appears that the 3 commissioners of the State Criminal Investigation Commission are politically appointed, and that seems to mean something.
On these other groups that were supposed to get money, are they aimed toward the drug users, which is the New Jersey's worst problem?
No.
As far as HIV positive. I work in the health field, and I deal with it every day.
No. Molly Coy, just again like Robert Hummel did with $1 million of missing money, gave lip service to the IV drug abusers. They aren't getting it.
They're not getting anything. It's all going to the homosexual
Not all
groups?
of it, but they're not getting the proportionate share, just
I
based
see.
on numbers even.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you.
It's right. This thing seems to have been appropriated by the homosexuals, Betty.
Right, but is there this a slush fund in effect as far as what the monies look like on paper?
Yes, that $1 million and many other dollars that I'm not even aware of, I would call a slush fund without a doubt, so they can use it for their own private agendas. Absolutely.
And what about the groups that are? I take it they have to have some kind of credentials to get, like a nonprofit kind of credentials to get the monies to come in from the CDC.
That's true. The state auditor's report for the state of New Jersey said that